Greetings. Welcome to the Durham Human Rights Commission meeting of December 4th, 2024. It's 4:15 and we are in the council chambers. I call this meeting to order. Before we get into anything more on the agenda, I wanted to welcome Leslie Schwartz, who's our new regular member of this Human Rights Commission.
Thank you.
So welcome. All right, land acknowledgement statement. The town of Durham, New Hampshire wishes to acknowledge the spiritual and physical connection maintained by the Pennacook, Abenaki, and Wabanaki peoples to Endakana, homeland, Aki, land, Nibi, water, Lolakakak, flora, and Awaasak, fauna. New Hampshire has been home to these indigenous people for thousands of years. The residents of Durham acknowledge the ongoing hardships endured by our indigenous neighbors after the loss of their unceded homelands, which we now steward, and we will work to foster relationships to support the well-being of indigenous people who carry forward the traditions of their ancestors. Next item, well, let's do a quick introductions. So can we just start here?
Janet Perkins Howland.
Richard Belshaw.
Leslie Schwartz.
Sally Needell.
Deborah Hirschmayer.
Kathy Collins.
Todd Selig.
I will say, and I will do my best to remember, that changes were made. You know, at the last meeting, you talked about changing this group and how it's done. So that allowed us to gain another resident. And Administrator Selig and I are no longer voting members, but we are participants in the process, just not voting. Yes.
Just for the minutes, for the record, can you spell your last name, please?
Schwartz.
Okay. Leslie,
And
L-E-S-L-I-E.
thanks for asking,
Yeah,
because
sure.
people screw it up all the time.
Yes.
Like L-E-S-L-I-E.
Oh, awesome, thank you.
All right, approval of the agenda. Does anyone want to make any changes to our agenda? Yes.
I'm wondering, I have a question first, but on the agenda item number 6, discussion of writing a letter to Durham's legislatures regarding Durham's observance of Indigenous Peoples Day versus Columbus Day. Is there a time deadline for such a letter? Should that be done or completed soon?
Well, we have one that Janet wrote. Yes.
You wrote one, all right, okay.
Well,
but-
no, I think you were going to
Right.
do a first draft, and I was just sending suggestions that I thought that I sent to you, but
Right.
now I can't find that I did send them to you.
So-
But I did not write a formal letter.
I'm going to propose that we punt that issue to the next meeting.
It
It's
may
been,
end up that way just by reality.
I haven't been
As
able to
long
get
as
through it
there,
yet.
but the question is the same one I had in my mind, and is there a time deadline?
Correct.
Is this, because I know there's interest in taking evidence and suggestions and maybe changing a bill in the legislature, but I don't know the timing for that. So we'll see. So we'll punt if we need to, and
Okay.
yeah, okay. Anything else? So I guess I will move that we approve the agenda as potentially amended, based on our time. Yes?
Gail Jablonski is not in today.
Okay.
And so we should remove this item, the Human Rights Campaign report. We can do that next time.
Okay, so I amend my motion. I will start again.
Dropping like flies.
I move that we approve the agenda as amended, meaning we are not going to have our municipal equity index score presentation from Gail Jablonski, and we'll watch our time to see if we can get into a discussion of a letter on Indigenous Peoples Day and leave ourselves time to figure out when our next meeting is. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Commissioner Rachel. All those in favor, raise a hand. All those opposed? Good to go. Okay, so Sally, it looks like your presentation is first. We have a little more time.
Okay, well, those of you that may not know me, most of you I think probably do. My name is Sally Tobias, and I am the chair of the Durham Housing Task Force. And just a quick history of the Durham Housing Task Force. When the Economic Development Committee was sunsetted, back, it must have been COVID, 21, 20, I don't know. We made a decision, or Todd suggested actually, that we could perhaps open up a task force to look at housing. Actually, how I ended up getting into housing is through economic development and going to many of these economic development Main Street programs that they had. Me and Councilor Howland at the time, you know who that is. We went to a lot of these, and we kept running into things about housing. We were really kind of interested in a lot of things, but housing started to become something that was already at 2017, 2018, it was already knocking on the door. People just didn't notice it as much. And then we started to realize the deficiencies that we obviously had in Durham ourselves. And so we started looking at going to Exeter has a housing committee, and we went to theirs a few times, and we decided maybe that would be something we should have, since we have such an issue in Durham, obviously. So we began the housing task force to look at housing in Durham. So one of the things we often talk about is workforce housing. And people ask, well, what is workforce housing? And there actually is a lot of confusion about it, surprisingly enough. But housing which is designed to provide a broad range of living options that meet the needs of families and individuals that represent the majority of New Hampshire's diverse workforce. That's everybody from, the attendants at Circle K to your nurses in the emergency room. Workforce housing projects often include a variety of dwelling types suitable for households with different needs and income levels. That's the kind of the textbook definition. New Hampshire, the state of New Hampshire, conducted their own survey to address the state's future housing needs. And a fair share housing production model was created to assist the state's municipalities and planning commissions in determining what are present and future housing needs statewide. The task force actually hired RKG to do a report using some of that data to examine Durham's particular needs. What happened is the state started having conversations with companies that were expressing a concern in being able to attract people here and find adequate housing for the people they were trying to hire and come. Even some high-level jobs. I spoke to one person at the planner in Exeter, and they were talking about a story that they went through with ashram in Exeter, which is for a high-level managerial position. The person spent several months trying to find housing and could pay, but he couldn't get in to a place. And he finally just said, forget it, we're not taking the position. And so they had to start all over again, which isn't a lot of, when you're hiring at a high level, there's a lot of investment in there. So it was becoming a problem. Anyways, the total that the state discovered statewide that we would need between 2020 and 24, and this is the total units needed, 88,395 total units. And that would be because we were adding about just under 75,000 new households between that time. And that would be mixed between ownership and renter. Now, as I said, RKG did a report to determine what our portion of that share is. 88,000 is a lot of new units that we need. They looked at the numbers and they adjusted down because of the student population. We didn't need, it kind of skewed it a bit. So our adjusted for 2040 for our future housing needs for a non-student population is 455 units, which is a little bit easier to swallow for some people. For some, it still seems like a lot, but it's not that much. Now, of course, here, why should Durham respond to this situation? And we've heard, many people have a lot of opinions about that, but we have to remember that Durham is a part of a larger community. We don't have a bubble that goes over the town. We live all over. Durham residents rely on workers who live in a wide geographical area and often have long commutes. We have people that work in Durham that may have long commutes and have to drive, but we also have people that live in Durham that travel outside of Durham. We go to Lowe's, we go to Target. Those places are staffed by people from other areas. So we're all part of an area, and we all are responsible to share in that responsibility. Durham is not affordable to many and offers few housing opportunities for those who want to live here. You're going to basically look at minimum of $500,000, and you'll have to put in a new kitchen and baths. And it's more. And right now, I think there's one house on the market. It's in the 9s. And we also don't have options for, like, say, for instance, our children, our adult children. If they grew up here in Durham and they want to, live in Durham, they don't really have that option because there's no place to live other than their own parents' house. There's no apartments. There's none of that normal move from the house, your parents' house, to your own situation. And our older people that may want to size down and don't want to be paying, living in that large home anymore, that would like just the aspect of renting in an apartment building actually creates a safety net for many people if they're not in assisted living, because if you fall, you can bang on the floor long enough, your neighbor's going to hear you and come help. You're not alone in a house. And because of this, Durham does suffer from a lack of growth and a lack of diversity. I think the council is realizing that lack of growth. We have not added any assessment of any significance in the past 10 years, really, since the online of the student facilities. And that is just not normal. That's not normal. Other towns have been building in these past 10 years. Durham has stopped, and that needs to be addressed. And many residents feel that Durham has a moral responsibility to help alleviate the housing crisis. I certainly am one of those. I think if you're not choosing to make the moral choice in just about everything, in my opinion, then I don't know what choice you're making. So that's just me. Our master plan supports the creation of affordable housing. This is from the 2015. Our vision for 2025, we are not going to meet this benchmark. Durham provides affordable housing opportunities in safe, healthy, and dynamic neighborhoods for working families, the elderly, professionals of all ages, retirees, and students. We have plenty of student housing, but even on the side of elderly and retirees, we have over 55 facilities. We have Riverwoods. We have, some options, but they're not necessarily affordable. And those that are affordable have very long waiting lists to get into, such as like the Churchill and those places, which are great for people to have, but it's not easy to get in because it's a limited supply. This came out of the RKG report, and it's taken from census data. Geographic trends in Durham from 2011 to 2021. As I said, that was the census data that we have. 18 to 24-year-olds, we saw an increase of 1,671, which I think many people are aware that when the student facilities came online, we had a lot more kids move in. 25 to 34 increased by about 50, which is an interesting number, or about 9%. But this is where it gets a little concerning. 35 to 44 years decreased by 39 or 4.9%. 45 to 55 decreased by 47.7%, or 649 individuals. And 55 to 64 decreased by 208. Our 65 and up increased by 295. Of course, everyone is aging. But that may reflect a little bit of the Riverwoods, maybe because they really didn't come online until right around that time. But when you're looking at, say the 45 to 55 and 55 to 65, that's your empty nesters, and they're just choosing to leave because they don't want to be in their large home anymore. Which again, it puts a large home or a family home on the market, but still in a limited amount. And with not a lot of other options, the prices have gone up nationwide. And the 35 to 44, it's decreased, which is your childbearing ages. And so what are we? We have lots of students and lots of elderly people. And I apologize for the picture of the elderly person. It's the only one that showed up on if I looked for a little icon, said over 65. But that's actually, he's there to fight off the foxes going down the road. So this is a picture of our zoning map. And I'm sure all of you know exactly where you live and what zone you're in, and I bet you know exactly the square footage of the house that you can build in your home and what's allowed in your area and what's not allowed. But a lot of people actually don't pay attention to zoning at all. I think in Durham, more people are aware of it because a lot of people are very engaged in that kind of thing in Durham. But still, it's believe it or not, it's something that people just don't get into. I don't know why. I think it's exciting. But, so these are some possibilities. And these are things that we have, or we could fix her up a little bit more. So we allow accessory dwelling units, or the ADU, if they are attached. They are allowed by right in all residential zones in the town of Durham. And they're allowed by right because the state requires them to be allowed by right. But they have to be attached, and there has to be a door between the ADU unit and the main house with the option of having it locked, which doesn't even correspond to fire code. It's odd. It's a little creepy too. It's a lot creepy. Right now we don't allow detached ADUs. We do allow them only in our rural area or rural residential coastal, RC, which is residential coastal or rural. We do allow them there, but those areas have larger footprints, larger minimum building requirements, so they fill. But right now, if you have a detached garage, you can't turn it into an ADU if you're in RA or RB. So that is something that we could make allowed by right. And of course, there would be certain conditions that, would go along with that, setbacks and all of that would need to be followed. But is that something that people could see happening? And if so, where would they want it, in RA and RB? And, what are the conditions? There could be a lot of additional units brought on. And these are the kind of things that can allow someone to stay in their home. And the reality too, for even the cost, there's a lot of equity in homes right now, and the renting of that unit or the living in that unit and renting of the main house will more than pay for any cost incurred. Not that I'm an expert at it, but just saying. Duplexes. Durham does not allow duplexes anywhere in the town except for senior housing developments. That is came directly from a concern about student housing or students taking over duplexes because of a certain condition that actually did occur in Durham where that happened. But duplexes offer a smaller footprint house and therefore a lower cost house. You can get down to a price that's more attainable, not necessarily what we all consider, the workforce housing level, but more attainable for people to get to. Should we allow duplexes to come back? They're a pretty historical. Everybody has seen these. Duplexes were built all over New England, all over the country actually. These are older units, so they certainly do fit into our our aesthetic in Durham. When it comes to fears with students living in them and taking them over, there are things that can be done that can be attached to any ordinance where they were allowed. And we also need to remember that the conditions on the ground in Durham concerning student housing is not the same as it was 20 years ago. We have more than enough student housing right now. Therefore, the homes, single-family homes, are not as enticing because they're expensive. Cottage courts, everybody envisions these adorable little things. This is something similar, was built by John Randolph, who owns Harmony Homes. He's also developed quite some workforce housing. His Back River Road development is based on this. It's a very communal feel. They are high density, taking up a very small amount of land, but creating a lot of housing in a very community-centered environment. Where could we put that? There certainly are lots in RB and certainly in RC and R that could take advantage of this, and maybe even in RA. Multifamily residential, presently it's not allowed anywhere except for senior housing for the same reasons as the duplexes. The people are concerned about them just turning into big student facilities. But the same is true. There are conditions that we can add to any zoning that is associated with this to require the owner of the deed living there, and there's certainly when you are building these like on the picture on the left, the townhouse type of things, you're selling them as condominiums, and there can be rules that we require that they're not rentable. So there's things that can be done to eliminate them being taken over by students. But again, conditions on the ground are not the same. But where would you want to see these? Would you want to see these in RB, or would you want to see these in R or RC, or in some of our industrial zones, our commercial areas, in like Moodor or Worley, OR? They could fit very well into that kind of place. And again, this is not new. The picture on the right, the blue house, that is probably at least a 4-unit house built for that purpose. It's not just a big house that they carved up. That was originally built for that purpose. Multifamily housing's been around for a long time. Some more pictures of multifamily. The one on the right is probably more from the 70s, and the one on the left is more from the 70s. The one on the right is what we're seeing now today. Whether you like it or not, we could have architectural design requirements. Conservation subdivisions, this is a place where we could really make some changes and not really change the amount of open space. Right now, it is our primary form of residential subdivision in the community. The number of units that you can build is equal to the usable area divided by the minimum per dwelling unit for the district. So if you're trying to build this in RA, you're going to take that usable area, which you have to figure out too through all this math, and then divide that by 20,000. In RB, it would be 40,000, RC 150, R 150, OR, which has our highest density of 4,200, and MUDAR 40,000, or Orly 150. So that means that right now, if you had a piece of land and you wanted to create a subdivision, it would have to be a conservation subdivision. And if it was, say, in Orly or R or RC, you would need 3 acres per house. And that's in a subdivision. That's a lot. You then have your common open space, which is again a percentage of the percent of the usable plus all unusable. So all the unusable land, and then you have to have a certain percentage of the usable land. So buildable land still has to be conserved. You could create, we could tweak these minimum lot requirements and create a more dense community within it and put the houses closer together and still maintain perhaps even more open space than what this allows for. Single-family home density, our rural zone's about 3.5 acres. That's a lot. Residence B is just under an acre, and Residence A is about 1/2 an acre. And strangely enough, in Residence A, many of the properties are out of, are non-compliant. They've been built on smaller than that. Because it's always been the same. The more land you build and the bigger your house, that's why they say, oh, he's rich, he lives up in the big house. Well, yeah, that's why Victorian big houses were built up on the hill. And you went up the hill, further up the hill you want, the richer you were, and the bigger your house was. It creates, it does create a wall for people to have to climb over to own a home. Greater density and infill, density could create higher density on a piece of land, you're going to get more housing. But where we have some dense neighborhoods already, and Faculty neighborhood is a very dense neighborhood and it seems to run pretty good. But say the pictures on the right are actually in Dover. The one on the bottom, those are new homes that had actually been divided by two single-family homes. They divided the lots up and they created, it's about, what is it? I remember it was 6 or something like that. Anyways, they created more. They created a little cul-de-sac there of a bunch of new homes.
Is this the one on Sophia?
I don't think this is
Okay.
I don't think this is Sophie Banner,
Yeah.
but Sophie Banner in Dover is a great place to drive through if you're ever going. If you ever go to the Dover Fields in Dover, just go toward Dover a little bit more, take your first left and go up there and you can drive right into it. It's amazing how much they've gotten in there. And they're actually housed at Attainable, and their new homes that are single-family homes are selling in the 6s.
Wow.
And that's because of the cost of reality. But they have some apartments there, and they were, because of the way they were able to gain more, basically some more building options there, they were able to bring some of the rents down to a fair market rent that was attainable to a few people that they normally wouldn't have been able to. Central Business District, of course, this is where we hear, everybody's saying this is where we need to be focusing all of our housing, but it's not practical, for one thing, to do all of our housing there. I would say we do need to look elsewhere. But right now, senior housing is allowed. Senior housing multi-unit is allowed by conditional use. Where you would put it, I don't know. Mixed use with residential is allowed by conditional use. And presently, all the multi-units that are in the downtown area are taken up by undergraduate, and they are built with the intention of renting to undergraduate. They are student-focused, built for that purpose. They must rent to anybody that wants to, but they do rent by the bed, and so if you're looking at a 4-bedroom, they're going to make you pay over $4,000 for that entire room. And so it's not necessarily practical for someone to live in there now unless they're going to be living with 3 other roommates. So we actually did reach out to the lease agent at Madbury Commons, and he says they have had off and on non-students renting there, but it just doesn't really work out for them because of the cost if they want their own place. There's a reason why even grad students choose not to live that way. But then, of course, we have the question of obviously the council was that was part of your agenda the other night, I believe, is discussion of the makeup of downtown. How do you increase the vibrancy and encourage more diverse business in the downtown? And our downtown is challenged right now. You know, there's certainly some opportunity to build some housing downtown. It would be very specific types of housing. It may not necessarily be the place where families would live, but it would certainly create housing that many people would find, you know, suitable, as long as it wasn't designed as student housing. Because I can tell you right now, my son is not going to live in student housing. He still lives at home. Actually, I don't think he ever wants to leave, but I'm kind of hoping he will. So that's it, you know. Final thoughts. So what I'm interested now is just what you think about what you wouldn't mind seeing, what kind of housing you think would be appropriate. Think about your own neighborhood, what would work, and think about I think most of you know the town, you know, pretty well. You could see, you know, what are your thoughts on any of these things? And I can switch back to any pictures if anybody needs any reminders. So you can call up or I can go around the room.
I just want to come up here so I can see everyone better.
Yeah, and he'll answer questions too. Who wants to start?
I'd say if you have time and opportunity, it might be worth going down Back River Road to see the development that's there. There are 44 homes on a very small piece of land. It's off a road called Uncommon, I think. Because we had to find it. We went looking. I think
Uncommon
Yeah.
Drive.
Uncommon Drive.
Uncommon Drive,
yeah.
yeah.
It's changed its name. It used to have a different name.
Oh, okay. And then there is the one that's off of, sort of behind the high school. There's a new development there that's really a mix of homes and what look like
Yeah,
condominiums or more of a townhouse kind
Yeah.
of look.
yeah. Developers have been doing a lot in, this is the market right now, and they see that, you know, and they are trying to cut it down so they can sell it as reasonably as they call attainable has become the real word, and they need the density. And Dover has been very progressive in that, but they have some mechanisms that they use to allow developers to purchase density.
Do you want to explain HUD and with the numbers that when these become, if these are built and they're rented, like how they become affordable?
Well, that's the thing that not everything is built as workforce housing. There's certainly in the state, there is intentional workforce housing. And if you're building workforce housing, it has to be intentional because you have to find ways of saving money. And if you're getting any kind of grants from the state, there are certain criteria that you have to persistently follow in perpetuity or a set time. And those are usually set at HUD rates, which are, they vary from year to year, but they're not necessarily that far off the average of what people are paying. So they would have to look at, in those particular, if they're doing that, they're going to look at their income, and because they're required to fill a certain amount of spaces. What some developers are doing now, because of that requirement of a certain percentage within these numbers, they're doing what they call income averaging, and it's something that we implemented in the workforce housing overlay, where we took fair market rent, which is the number that HUD looks at. It's the average rent in the area per bedroom, and that's how they determine what somebody that applied for a housing voucher. You say, oh, well, in your area it's going to cost $1,800 for a 2-bedroom apartment. So your income is this, so you need this much money of the voucher, and that's how they determine. And then people then go in and pay it with the voucher on top of their own money too. So that's kind of how that works. But when they're doing the income averaging, they say, well, I have to have a certain percentage within, say, 60% of fair market. I can rent out at full full market, and that lets me to, I still have 60% in that number, and that's how they kind of figure it out. But HUD looks at the area, how much it costs, and then looks at an average.
I wonder, Sally, if we could, if we have time, ask 2 questions to each
Sure.
member of the commission. One is just really general question. What's your perception of the housing situation in Durham? And then after that, if we could ask, Sally presented lots of possibilities for sort of densifying ways to add more housing into the existing fabric, which is generally pretty low density. And which of those, if any, do you think might work well in Durham and be accepted to the community?
Who wants to go first? Richard has his hand up. You want to go, Richard? Go ahead.
All right, okay. I actually have about 1 million questions, so I'll only cut it down to a few. In answer directly, I think there are areas of Durham that could be candidates for increasing the density. I live in, B, District B, and there's definitely space there for particularly the ADU, the add-on, what's that stand for again? The
Accessory dwelling unit.
accessory dwelling unit. I think there's a lot of opportunity for that in District B. I have a question related to that demographic in the 25 to 35 range, which is where do you go for your shelter is the most basic of needs, and where do you go if you haven't found employment yet, or you have found employment that's part-time, or you're just getting off the ground, or if you are seeking a vocation that is not traditionally jumping into the workforce and making whatever. I mean, there are lots and lots of people like that. As a parent, and I think as most parents might agree with me, is that they have kids, you're expecting these days to have 1 or 2 or, still live with you after college or return, because it's so difficult to find anything. And $1,000 a month is, I'm thinking, where's the $500 a month for just a room and a bathroom and a little kitchenette, I mean, that would work for a lot of people. Associated with that is opportunities for work, which is commercial space, space if you're a musician to practice, for art studios, for manufacturing. A lot of people need those spaces, and there are not any in Durham. And I know this because I'm a visual artist, and I haven't found any studio space here at all over the years. And I'm doing that in my garage right now. To me, that's sort of connected. As a parish priest in Portsmouth, I have people that are, unhoused, that are just, they're not in any danger of adversely affecting society, and they're not addicted, they're not criminals, they just can't find a place to live. They're living in their cars, or if they have a car, or they live in the woods when it's warm. Where do those people live? It seems to me that maybe, and I'm not just saying this is a Durham's problem, but is there a solution that could include consideration for people like that? For instance, there's the expectation or rule that says if you build a 5-story building, you have to include commercial space if it's a student residential building. Maybe something like that says, if you build something, include 2 or 3 apartments for people that are specifically that age, and
For
something
that,
like
yeah.
that. I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, but that's, society kind of doesn't pick up on this for that demographic. And that's a big hole in this.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, very, very well stated.
Yeah, I agree 100% because if you look, I always use Circle K as my example, but if that had to close down because they couldn't have workers, they make $17 an hour tops. You are not supporting yourself on $17 an hour.
It's a failure of society today. We used to do it a lot better. And boarding houses, we don't build boarding houses anymore. We don't even allow boarding houses. And yet, I would much rather have a boarding house, whether it's in Durham or Dover, Rochester, wherever. I'd much rather have a boarding house with 10, 20 units. And we used to call them, whatever, cold water flat. You know, all I want is a room. I just give me 500 square feet. You know, we probably can't have a hot plate because there's safety issues, but a shared bathroom. All I want is a room and a bed. I'll even have a shared bathroom and a shared kitchen. And what an inexpensive way to create housing for singles, even couples. And our zoning and other building codes have made that very difficult, and that's a real loss. And then you were also referring to what's sometimes called live-work units. And those have really come back, whether it's artists and musicians and loft spaces that we see in a lot of cities. And we're seeing a lot of new, live workspaces that are created, whether it's a workspace or even a kind of a small retail and you live there. So we are seeing a lot of that, but that's happening more in creative cities that have a lot of density and a very, kind of a rich historic building fabric that they can recycle buildings in lots of ways. Durham's been more resistant. We're a small town, it's kind of rural, people treasure the open space, and are very, because as Sally said, with student housing, it's more difficult to do density and multifamily. But we're seeing more of that kind of thing in new communities, new urbanist developments, places like Dover and Rochester and Portsmouth, really pretty innovative. And we would like to see Durham, allow for more flexibility in our zoning so that we could do that. But those are things like with a planned unit development, we're thinking about doing, like for the Edge with UNH, with a large parcel of land, we have vacant land, 20 acres, that you could have more density, more creativity, more housing options. When it's really well designed, you preserve open space, you have buffers. It's very doable. We just have to have determination to do it.
So just quickly, if you go online, you can find all kinds of really interesting housing for, not small, modest mansion type things, really small things, not trailers, but, really interestingly designed live-in places that are really, I'll say $20,000, $25,000 to buy and construct. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot that people are doing right now. And I'm wondering if there's a space where you could put 10 or 12 of those things. And that would be really low-cost housing for...
Almost like a tiny house development.
Yeah.
Somebody had mentioned that on Ag Committee, a tiny house development.
And that's essentially what you can see if you go down Back River Road.
You could, because it does offer an opportunity.
Yeah, just
Leslie?
off of what Richard was saying, we have a requirement that the housing have this commercial space in town. Do developers ever look at that, or could they ever use it as space that could be used as studio space? It might be more profitable than empty?
And what is the commercial space that people are utilizing downtown? It's
Right.
not like it used to be with stores and things like that. They're
Right.
usually specialty stores where you have to have people coming in, and it's expensive to pay the rent. And so usually restaurants and coffee shops and things like that are, and then you'll have your bigger store, like your grocery store and your, pharmacy and things like that.
I'm thinking of that, the space where Wildcat Fitness was.
Yeah.
There's a lot of space there.
There's flexible space. If we
flexible
allowed it to
space.
be more flexible rather than just commercial, and then allow the type of commercial to come in.
And do our ordinances allow for that? Is there anything that does not allow
Probably
that?
not. That with first floor has to be commercial in central business district.
Could
And
it be
so-
considered commercial because people are actually paying rent to have a studio?
Well, it
or
could be
an office?
arguable. I would think it probably could.
But, yeah, I see what you're,
Well, we're sort of, I mean, it's an interesting point. We're kind of bumping up against two different objectives. One is the commercial vibrancy of the downtown, and the
Right.
other is providing more housing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of create a lot more people renting in that space and could create a vibrancy because they would be able to sell their wares or have whatever, situation. It would become more of an art space type of thing. Leslie, you had your hand up.
Yes. To your questions, Michael, and I just want to refer back to a moment ago you were talking about Durham being resistant to density and further development in general, and I think that I don't want to say prevailing, but I think there's a strong ideology in this town, yes, against development. And I wonder, and I'm speaking rhetorically here, how you have a lot of information and have done quite a bit of work with your task force. How do we overcome that ideology? And maybe ideology is a strong word, but it's certainly the way that I see it, and that's in personal interactions with people and having discussions about the situation. Generally, I think long term there's and characterizes, and it's okay, I'm in the second group, that characterizes our population. And so as you spoke to earlier, Sally, because the housing is not affordable to the folks who fall into the what we call the workforce sector, that's going to perpetuate that problem. That being said, wanted to, your second question, Michael, was where might we see density, possibilities for density being increased. And I was very interested in what you presented about the ADUs and the requirement for attachment. So if that were to change, that at least would become more universal in people having that opportunity. Right now, obviously, people who own properties are precluded based on the way that the configuration or what the requirements for the configuration and the contiguous nature of the ADU. So that's something that I think is certainly worth pursuing further. And I will almost say, to me, it's a no-brainer in some respects. So, thank you.
Do you want to go, Deborah?
I agree that there's a problem with housing in town, and not enough of it, not enough.
Oh, Deborah, can you speak into the mic?
Not enough of it, not enough diversity in terms of what is available and the cost. Absolutely. As I was looking at the pictures and we were going through the options, each one I thought, well, that could work. Well, that could work. I can't right now make the leap from the kinds of dwellings to where I would put them in Durham. I live in the faculty neighborhood, and I'm struck. The houses there, when we moved in over 30 years ago, were quite modest, and over the years, people have added, and there have been ADUs added. It's you can walk out on your driveway and say hello to your neighbor. And I'm always struck when I go for a walk over the Kenny Rotner Bridge over to Foss Farms, where the houses are like huge. You go out of your driveway and you wouldn't be able to talk to your neighbor. And there are a lot of other neighborhoods like that in Durham. I don't know what could be done. The people bought their property and they lived there and they want it the way they want it. But if you look sort of at the problem altogether, it's kind of crazy how you have one or two people in this giant property, or even in some houses, probably because people can't leave their house and find an apartment to live in, and you've got one or two people traveling around. And one of the thought I had as I was listening was, and I'm sure there are rules about this, but we talk about all of these different kinds of housing, and it's imperative that if not all of those housing units, at least some of them need to be accessible. So that needs to be, taken into account when you start thinking about apartment buildings, and will there be elevators, will there be ramps, will there be staircases that need to be worked around?
That's a good point, actually, making more accessible units.
I am on the minutes job here. So I'm taking notes and processing. So with regard to the questions, my perception of the housing situation is worrisome. In my neighborhood, right on my street, a neighbor at the end of the summer who's lived in Durham for a very long time, worked in the school district, had to leave because they couldn't afford to keep their house up, and they had an adult child that needed to live with them, so they moved to a condo in Manchester. And that's a person who's knows generations of people in the Oyster River community who had to leave, and watching homes go up for, I'm in the faculty neighborhood too, and I love all the density attribute. That's the reason we moved there. My kids used to say, I'm glad we don't live in a long driveway neighborhood, because they just walk out the door and see friends, and she would walk around the neighborhood, and she knew my kids' baseball schedule. The morning after, she would ask scores, and she was of a certain age, and it was just so nice to see those kinds of interactions. And so, and my neighborhood, if we wanted to sell our house, we couldn't afford to stay in Durham. So there's so many people who are housebound because where do I go? And so I think a lot of people that families have downsized need to stay in their houses because they don't have a place to go. So, which I think you addressed earlier. So, I think I'm a natural born renter. I lived in New York City. I love people on top of me, people at the side of me. I love looking out the window into other people's windows. Sorry, I do. So I'm all for more higher density locations, and I think that I was really attracted to the duplex idea, and I think those can be really beautiful and appeal to people with a certain ideology about what Durham means and what Durham's seacoast-centric. So I don't know other neighborhoods in Durham. I wouldn't be able to say, oh, this area would be a great place to place that. But I was reading, I have a relative who's really struggling to stay on the seacoast, who works at a job that pays in the low 20s, $20 an hour, and is with medical costs is week to week and making choices about groceries. So we're seeing in my family, we're seeing the problem live, but
I won't say too much because I've publicly said a lot about housing for quite a while now, but I do appreciate, and I just want to call Sally out for, I think you've been to every commission and committee in Durham with this presentation, and so that's a huge lift. So thank you for doing that. And I do appreciate the question, Michael, but I think I said before, I feel like it is unfortunately sort of the wrong question, because I think most of us all of us own a house, so we're already, and that's kind of the problem. My comments really run along what Leslie was saying, is that I hear a lot of people saying, I am in favor of workforce housing. And yet they don't, there's nothing that they want to give up. And in fact, just the opposite to make that happen. So we've heard so many anecdotes about how, like, we moved here in 1998, and I've heard people in the faculty neighborhood, they couldn't afford the house that they have now, and yet we were able to come here, raise our children in these amazing school districts, enjoy all this open space. And I just feel like that if people look right down inside, they say, okay, I have mine, and now we're good. So I wonder how you do change hearts and minds, to Leslie's point. So there's a problem on both sides. There's a problem of, like, just making it work dollars and cents wise, and there's a problem of this resistance. So I don't know how that's going, if it's just more, presentations like this or that kind of thing or whatever. But I guess density, stock, just increasing stock, no matter how many, whatever those options were, it seems like you could get more people into, increasing density. But I just don't think that when we say, yes, I'm for affordable housing, you cannot say that and then change nothing about your zoning, change nothing about, like, your thoughts that this is for other towns, we've already done enough, we have the student problem. These things don't move the needle forward with this. And then the last thing I'll say is I'm really interested in more transitional housing options. I don't know where that would go, but we have lots of needs for people in recovery, people with disabilities. There's very exciting, and that would increase diversity here in town. I think it's a great opportunity.
I mean, I have heard people say, I'm fully in favor of workforce housing, but not here. And it's like, well, then where? And that's why we address it as they were, when it comes to student housing, students in Durham. It's not the same, and things have changed dramatically. And I think that the housing issue is starting to affect far more people than any other issue has. People are starting to see it. They're starting to realize it themselves. I'm 85, I'm living alone. What if I fall? Things happen so quickly, and should I be in this huge house? And how much is it going to cost to heat it this much? And I got to paint it, it needs a new roof, what? So there's a lot. It's because it's our most basic, seek shelter. You might have food, but if you don't have shelter, you're going to die. And so it's an important issue. But it's starting to just kind of seep into everything. I do think we have a moral obligation to provide more housing for everyone, and how it, we have the ability to do it without harming ourselves.
About how can we get, obviously it's happening. I see more and more references to it in the Friday updates and in the fact that you're here. But I'm also trying to think, how can we do more? And I wonder whether, from a public relations point of view, using the term workforce housing may not be a good term, and whether instead, the conversation should just be about how can we provide more diverse opportunities for people in Durham across the lifespan. Because I think there are people who may say, oh, if I have an adult child, I want them to be able to have an apartment near me and start their family. But if you say workforce housing, do I want to live next to the sort of person who's working at Target or at Circle K? Maybe not. So just, again, thinking as we move these conversations out more and more to people who aren't going to seek them out on their own, how to frame it and what semantics to use.
That's a really good point, because I think as we were going along with the overlay district and realized that we're not really creating, workforce housing is almost like it's an old term. And the reality is you need housing, because what's happening is more people, the homelessness actually went up in New Hampshire, and actually the numbers in our school district went up, which is really frightening when you realize these are children that are living in unpredictable housing situations. But, you know, when you have people that could afford an apartment in Dover and pay $1,400 a month if they had a roommate, and they were, you know, $600-700 a month, and then COVID, everything went up, and then now somebody that can afford $2,000 a month can't find an apartment because there's no numbers, there's just no inventory. So if you have more money, you are buying down, and that's actually, that came up in the RKG report, that's actually happening in Durham with the purchase of homes. Somebody that can afford more is buying a less expensive home because they can make a little bit higher offer, and they can offer a stronger offer and get into the house, and they beat out that person that may have having a mortgage or whatever, and then they do whatever they want to it. And the faculty neighborhood is just, it's a cute neighborhood. They're all a little different. It's becoming, it's so popular because look at this cute little neighborhood I can live in.
We had a neighbor move
Yeah.
a year or two ago. They put their house on the market, had an open house. I think there were 12 cars outside our house, people looking at it. And the asking price was a certain amount, and they got a cash offer for that amount plus half of it. You know, so like if they were asking for 400, they got a cash amount for 600. So all the other, I mean.
And that's because that person had the ability to do that. So they pushed out that, maybe that first time or second time home buyer. So that's the reality of it, and more people are being exposed to that. But I do think the terminology. We're not offering a place for our children to grow. Like, I have 3 adults living at home. I had one kid that did move out, and he moved back in. Luckily, I have an apartment in my house, But we're not giving our kids a place to land if they want to stay by. And we can't stay ourselves. So we kick our kids out of the nest, and we kick ourselves out of the nest at some point, because where are you going to go? Interesting.
Well, I think you've gotten some good information from this group. You might need to close things just so we can get on to some other work. Unless there's something that stands out something more that you need, but.
Have you thought about taking your presentation or some modification of that to the local churches, or just thinking about, I know you're doing the committees now.
Yeah, we are. Actually, we're doing...
You're going to the Freedom Cafe?
We're doing the Freedom Cafe next Tuesday evening, and that's going to be, the community is invited to that. And Paul Rasmussen had a conversation with the Unitarian Church about housing a few weeks ago, and there's a possibility of going to Riverwoods too.
Yeah. Oh, right.
Yeah, but next Tuesday night at Freedom Cafe. But thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so much.
Thanks, it was very helpful. So I want to jump to, I think we do have time to talk about the Indigenous Peoples Day letter. But just knowing how things often go with this group, I wonder how people feel about choosing our next meeting date and then returning to the agenda, if that sounds okay. Leslie, this is a group that has a challenge finding time to meet. We're not like most groups, first and third Monday or whatever. We're when we can make it work.
I assume we're talking about January, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
For January or February, because we usually meet every other month.
Well, we don't really have a set anything.
Okay.
I guess it's also need-based, so it could be February.
Well, I'll just say, I'm going to be out of town January 9th through February 1st. So if you have
Okay.
it in January, I probably won't
January
come. I
won't-
could maybe zoom in, but I'm going to be on the West Coast, so.
Okay.
And my long-term sub position turned into a longer-term sub position.
Ah.
So I'm for the rest of the school year. I can get here at 4:00, but I'm working in school every day.
Sure. Okay.
And I'm retiring officially at the end of this month, so anything sounds good to me.
All right.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I can do more.
Yeah.
I can do
Can we
more.
do really early February? Can we do like February 4th or? When are you coming back?
I'll be back February 1st. And we can just pick a date. I'm expecting the birth of another great niece or nephew. So depending on when it is, if there's a bris, I may be out of town on short notice, but we can't plan around that because who knows when the baby will come.
Tuesday, February 4th?
I hate
Yes.
to interrupt, but Tuesdays are really hard for me if I after 4 o'clock. I usually leave here at 4:30.
Wednesday?
Wednesdays are good.
Great.
Wednesday, the 5th.
The 5th?
At
At
4:15?
No, yeah, 4?
Four,
You want to
I-
try for 4?
I have to make it 4:15.
4:15, okay. All right, so that works for everybody? Amazing.
Wednesday,
As long as
February
there
5th at
is a Zoom
4:15.
option, just in case.
There is, there is. So Wednesday, February 5th, 4:15. And I'm looking at the clock, just thinking that we agreed sort of to 5:45. Should we try to stick with that again?
Yeah, I have to leave at 5:30, but,
Okay.
because I'm wearing a dress.
And it sparkles.
Sparkly dresses for a reason.
It'll stop sparkling if
Making us all
you're
look
past
bad.
5:45.
Okay. Sounds good. I think the only downside of Zoom is needing to have a quorum, and Todd and I don't count because we don't vote. So there need to be at least 3 of you here. And at a future meeting, we can also discuss whether we want to, you can pick a new chair, because the chair of the town council no longer needs to be the chair of human rights. So if there's
But you
someone
can
who's-
be.
I can be.
Okay.
But if there's anyone that's like, I really would like to be chair, we'll do rock, paper, scissors. Okay. All right, so should we talk about, well, one thing we could do quickly and then open up the discussion, although you're leaving in 5 minutes, so maybe we don't want to do...
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. Well, then let's go straight to Indigenous Peoples' Day and the letter.
I mean, I think it was difficult for Todd because he was following the law, but
Right.
our idea was different than the,
But I think
the law
this
that
is,
was passed.
but I think
Yeah.
this is, I saw this as a letter that can be taken to the legislature when it is brought up that maybe that bill needs to be reconsidered.
correct.
Okay. We just don't know when that is. Yes?
So I believe that Tim Horrigan was going to submit a bill to address this, or try to address it. And the deadline for the reps, I think, has passed now to submit bills. The senators, I think, have a little more time,
Okay.
I believe. I'm not positive. I mean, it's right about now. Wayne Burton, newly elected rep from Durham, also expressed an interest in supporting a bill like this. And a representative from Newmarket named Reed is her last name.
Ellen,
Ellen Reed also expressed an interest. So I think there'll be something, some piece of legislation that we'll be able to engage with as the session gets underway. Today, the reps were all sworn into office officially at 10 this morning.
So do we even need to write a letter if there's already,
I think right now, we don't. My understanding is that those 3 were going to introduce something.
okay.
And then I'd suggest once we see what the bill is, and eventually a hearing would be scheduled, we have something to present at that hearing, which will be in sometime in 2025.
Okay.
I mean, that would be the thing, the public hearing to be, because they come up so fast,
Yes.
and then you're just like, okay, it's going to be Thursday, and then nobody's cleared their schedule, so should we reach out to those people that have,
To our reps?
right, that are,
We could do that. You could
Yeah.
write a letter. I mean, we could craft a letter now and send it to those 3, or to Wayne and Tim specifically, because they're our representatives. And then we can ask them to let us know when the bill will be heard.
okay. So do you want to, are you working on a letter?
I haven't had time to fully get into it
Okay.
at this point, but I That's why I asked about the deadline. If there was a deadline, say, next week, I would commit time early next week to this. But
Then there's a deadline of next week.
there's a deadline. Well, then I'll do it. But does it make sense to ask Wayne and Tim to appear at our February 5th meeting? I mean, that's sort of early in 2025. Maybe we can get a handle on
I think that's a good idea.
something like that. I'm sort of hesitant to now write it, knowing that those folks are planning to present or challenge the new regulation. I would want to hear from them first.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Invite them in and engage in a dialogue, and hopefully they're available. If they're not, we can find another time.
But I do think this is very well written, Janet.
Thank you.
I think it lays things out really well and why we might, as a state, or we're not asking the state to make a change, but allowing the towns to make their own decisions. This, this is the letter that
Email it
Janet
to me,
wrote,
yeah.
and I don't know how well it
Sure.
was distributed. So,
I
I
think it
didn't-
gave it Karen, and Karen distributed it. Is that not correct?
I might have missed it.
I
but-
didn't see
Okay,
one.
I can do it again. That's fine.
Yeah.
That'd be
I
great.
don't remember seeing it.
Thanks. And I guess, we just have to consider that something won't pop up before our next meeting. And if it does, we'll call an emergency meeting.
That's great.
So, Todd, will you connect with Wayne and Tim and then
Yes.
have them let us know what time crunch they have?
I'll do that.
Ask about approving the minutes from October 8th.
What happened to item number 7? Did I miss that? It seems to me we keep kicking that down the road, and I thought,
This R7 is,
oh, so this is weird. Maybe the agenda I had, maybe it wasn't the last agenda, but it's the agenda
have
for today.
that
It says
same one.
discussion on the definition of anti-Semitism.
we can do that. Can we approve the minutes if,
I make a motion to approve the minutes of October 8th, 2024.
I second it.
second from Deborah? Any discussion? I will say I didn't see anything that needed to change, so that's all good. All right, so I keep forgetting, I keep voting, I don't get to vote. All those in favor, raise your hands. All those opposed? All right, looks like 5 out of 5, and then
One
an abstention.
abstention.
Sorry, 4 out of 5 with an abstention,
Thank you.
because Leslie wasn't yet here with us. Okay.
Leslie,
yes.
could I ask for Leslie's email?
Yes, here, I'll write it down.
You write it down? Thank you.
Do I
Okay.
need to put down who was it, who were the people in favor and the
You don't have to be that
with
specific.
names? Okay.
No names.
No
And
names
what you
needed.
wore.
More
today.
just the,
That would be
The
interesting.
sparkles, we have to
I just
acknowledge the
appreciate
sparkles.
Kathy taking this job incredibly seriously.
Oh my gosh, I am in a
We picked the right,
stenographer.
we picked the right secretary.
I'm a 1950s stenographer today.
Thank you for doing
I'm
that.
going to say yes.
in that case, in a few minutes, Janet needs to leave, but that does leave us some time to talk about anti-Semitism, and is that something you want to address?
No,
with this group?
Janet
Okay.
was the one who
Solution, I guess I maybe misinterpreted the, that we closed the loop the last time, so I could have, it would
Yeah.
just, and I'm not sure, I guess we answered that one resident's question, certainly not to their, liking, but I'm just wondering, like, if this, the larger question was, if something comes up, do we have a process to review it and filter it, and what is the purpose of,
Sure.
putting it on the website, that kind of thing? That's all.
Yeah, well, and actually, I did have a thought of that. I was a little confused. I thought that we had agreed that rather than having one definition, that we were putting these multiple definitions on the website, that they were there to be a resource if something came to the Human Rights Commission or some other board in town and it was like, well, is this anti-Semitism? Is it not? They could go, the board could go look, and I was a little confused by the letter that you wrote, Helena, because it seemed the wording of that suggested to me that you were saying, we decided to put these up there for residents who want to learn more about it. And I don't think that's where Helena was coming from or headed, and I didn't feel like that was really where I thought what we were doing was about either, that it wasn't just for information for the general public, it was, here are some tools if situations arise where we as a commission or other, hopefully other boards in town or committees in town help us determine that.
And I think it is a resource because it is now in a public place.
Yeah, it's
And
just, but my concern was when Todd wrote Helena, it sounded to me like it was, we put these up here so people can, who want to learn more can learn more. And it wasn't in the, I felt it needed to say, rather than adopting this one definition, we are committing ourselves to be aware of and fight against anti-Semitism, and if questions arise about what is or isn't anti-Semitism, we will turn to these resources. Of course, anyone else is welcome to turn to them too, but they're not there just because we think people should know. You know, let's post resources on other topics that people should know. You know, let's put housing forces or indigenous people, or let's just have resources on the website. No, these are resources so that if we have questions in our work, these are the things that will guide us, and I didn't think that came through to Helena.
Okay. Even though we understood that, it doesn't, she didn't necessarily understand it. Okay.
I have a question. I did try to read up on, you know, the history of this and so forth. So the resident or residents, I don't know how many people have this particular concern. I did read Helena's emails. So the folks who brought this up, do they wish, they want they want this body to adopt a definition?
Yes.
To make that?
And advise, you know, encourage the town council to adopt, the town of Durham should adopt the IRA resolution.
Okay. So my thought is, if the town adopts a particular definition, does that not lead us down the road to something legally binding? And that would be my concern, is to adopt a specific definition that may be legally binding, and do we have a process and a mechanism? Again, I have a tendency to speak rhetorically, but do we have a process and a mechanism, and what, you know, and what's, by adopting a particular definition, what are we unintendedly about when I was reading the information and the exchanges associated with this question. I don't know if that is worth, you know, when there's a response, and I'm speaking to what you were saying, Deborah, because you felt that just the statement that the definitions were put up as informational do we have an answer for a resident or residents who want a specific definition to be adopted or to be recommended by this body then for adoption by the town? And my answer would be some of the concerns I've just.
Also, we discussed it. We said we don't want to adopt this definition. We had some concerns about that definition. We also had concerns about adopting any particular definition. Right. So we said we're not adopting one definition. but here are 3 definitions that we will turn to in our work if questions come up as to what is or isn't anti-Semitism. I mean, that's at least what I understood us to have done. And I thought that was a good resolution. I wished that Todd's letter to the resident who brought this up had been more clear about, and I have to go back and read it. I just remember saying it's not just there for informational purposes. Rather than adopt one definition, we're looking at multiple definitions to guide us in our deliberations if we need to do that.
And based on your comments, it makes more sense for us in terms of just protecting the town. Yeah.
I think,
I mean, we're not
Exactly,
reluctant to
yes.
react to anti-Semitism in any way, but we're not, good point, that if we define it and we have not thoroughly included all that might be needed to be included, then there might be opportunities where anti-Semitism is taking place because we didn't define that it was not okay.
I think that your point, Leslie, is well taken. I also think that if the discussion were taking place right now and the resident was in the room, the pushback would be, this definition has been adopted by numerous countries, state government, states, countries, organizations. Like, who do you think you are that you know that you're worried about legal things and all these places aren't? But at this point, it's a moot point. In some ways, we made our decision, we communicated it. I have not spoken to the resident. I imagine they're not happy, but that's life, You don't always get things the way you want them.
I want to apologize publicly for not being conscious of, and I apologize because I was the one who offered to do that research. And so I would suggest, just coming from me, that this is an open topic, that, if we hear of something, in fact, it'd be good to keep a list of anything we do here that is particularly local, as it affects people living in Durham, and that, we post maybe a Q&A paper or something that, speaks to, we know this is an issue and we need to keep attentive to it. And by we being all of Durham. That's something we can do. And maybe that's more in line with what, maybe they can bridge the gap between Elena and, the town.
And may I ask, when you say a good idea to keep a list, are you saying a list of offenses or?
Anything, really.
Yeah,
It could
okay.
be, as simple as, somebody's done an act of destruction on my property, removing a sign, or it could be, or a flag, or it could be a comment. Let's keep track of anything that really speaks to prejudice, and let's note it and let people know that that's part of the equation for us, part of the knowledge. It's not in the official, documents that are online because those are global, essentially. But there can be instances of local, do I call it expression, that can be discerning, and we should know what that is.
Thank you.
And not just know what it is, but just, share it with those who need to know.
And Leslie, we had, I don't know how long ago, police department representation at a meeting to talk about what hate crimes mean in Durham, what it looks like, what the responses are, and what their protocols are. So I think we all felt very comfortable.
I appreciate your apology to the community From my perspective, no apology is needed. The committee looked at an issue that some residents brought forward, thought very thoughtfully, considered it, and came up with a solution. And I don't believe the residents who requested that we adopt such a definition would really be satisfied with anything short of our following their request, which we did not do, but we followed up for a variety of reasons. Yeah, in terms of who the policy or the definitions would be helpful for, I'm sorry, my impression was it was for the community as a whole, not necessarily for us to work with, but for us to work with if we had an issue that came up that was relevant to that. So I viewed it as a resource for everyone, including us.
I think it's both, and I understand how there could have been confusion. I guess I was, I think it's both, and I guess I'm, since I know Helena, and she wrote me a couple of times privately about this issue, I may be more sensitive, but I did feel bad that it took us as long as it did. I mean, people have things happening in their lives. When you offer to do something, you can't always do it timely. We only meet every so often. I understand the workings are slow, but I did feel bad that it took so long for us to reach the point we did. And I also, and Helena's response to your letter points to that. One of the things that she brought up was that, the people came to the town council meeting asking for a resolution about the war, and that night there were town councilors who were ready to pass the resolution, but when she came here to ask us to look at a resolution, it took us 6 months to reach the decision that we weren't. So she makes her own sense of that, and it's not my reality. I understand. I think that the town council erred horribly in trying to pass that resolution that night, and I understand that things take time, and I understand her frustration. So she's making a sense, putting that together in a way that makes sense to her. I don't agree with that, but I understand where it's coming from. So I guess I also think you're right, Todd, that anything short of adopting the resolution would not make her feel that she'd been heard and feel good. But I do think we need to try to be sensitive to moving things along when we can, and just that if we had said that we're using is, and so to say back to her, we're not adopting this one definition, but we have several definitions, and we care about anti-Semitism, and when situations arise, we will refer to that definition and others, feels like a different response to me than we have put that resolution and some other resolutions on the website for anyone to read. So it's just.
Was this request, was it catalyzed by a particular incident? Was there an incident?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it was catalyzed both by the things that happened at the town council meeting, starting the night that the town council meeting was visited by a huge number there, because it was very one-sided. There was another town council meeting where people from both points of view and many in between spoke. But in the weeks when all that was happening, it was reported to us by Helena and other residents who spoke that there were signs that were vandalized, and people had Stand With Israel signs that were vandalized, either damaged or disappeared. And so there was a sense that there were some incidents that, and the whole climate then, I think, was making people feel very ill at ease and worried about anti-Semitism.
Anything else to address tonight? I'm also looking at the clock, which is now past 5:45.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second
wait.
from Commissioner Schwartz. I'm sorry.
Did we reach a decision about Richard's suggestion? Did we say we would try to do that, track things, or just?
I think we should.
Yeah.
We should create a living document, if you will, a local document, and I think we should step up when we hear of something.
Then we can do
And
that.
I don't limit that to
If-
anti-Semitism.
If there are,
I couldn't
if there are
hear
things
what-
happening in town related to anti-Semitism, we should keep track. Yeah, I won't go any further since it's the time that it is. In favor of adjourning, raise your hand.